Hello everyone, and welcome back to the first 20 days of reading. Today is day 8, and I'm back. It's Mrs. Morley, and I cannot wait to get started. Review from yesterday. Mrs. Gill talked about the difference between fiction and nonfiction. In fiction, we know it is not real. There's a lot of story talk. We read to enjoy it and in order. There are illustrations, and often have a character, setting, problem, and solution. In nonfiction, we know that it is real. There is fact talks. We often read to learn. Oftentimes we can read in any order because there's a table of contents where we can get information. Today, day 8, we are going to do a literary analysis, talking about different kinds of fiction and nonfiction. In particular, today we are going to focus on fiction. There are many different types of fiction genres. For example, historical fiction, realistic fiction, fantasy, mystery, and science fiction. To get into that, we're going to compare some of those genres. We're going to look at the elements of fiction, paying particular attention to the setting, the character, and the plot in these stories. Let's start by introducing our genres. We have historical fiction, a fictional story that takes place in a particular time period in the past. Often the setting is real, but the characters are made up from the author's imagination. We have realistic fiction, a story using made-up characters but could happen in real life. And finally, we're going to look at fantasy, a story including elements that are impossible, such as talking animals or magical powers. We're going to start by looking at the characters in these stories. Let's start with historical fiction. The characters in historical fiction are based on real people from history. As you're writing, you might notice some famous names. The characters in realistic fiction are made-up characters that could really exist. Think about characters like moms, dads, brothers, and sisters, and even teachers. And finally, the characters in fantasy are make-believe or made-up characters. They can be real people or talking animals or even talking toasters. So even though all three are fiction, we see that the story elements in them are very different. Let's compare the setting of each. In historical fiction, the setting can be real places and times from history, or a specific historical place. In realistic fiction, made-up places that are like the time and places we know. Think neighborhoods, school, or home. And the setting in fantasy stories can be made-up places that do or don't exist, like a made-up planet or a farm with talking animals. Up, I want to compare the plot of these three genres in fiction. In historical fiction, the plot often follows events from certain historical time periods or events that really happened. For example, if you're reading any stories about a certain famous person that's made up, oftentimes the author might put events that actually happened along with events that are made up. In realistic fiction, events center around ordinary things that could happen in real life. Maybe you're reading a story about someone who's struggling in school or playing some sneaky jokes on their brother or sister. And in fantasy, the events are completely made up. Events and the plot come from the author's imagination. Often these are the stories where we see magical unicorns getting into trouble, or even elves working in a toy shop. So what's next? Well, We've said over and over again that reading is thinking. So today, as you dive into your book, I want you to do 3 things. 1, preview the text you are going to read. Is it fiction or nonfiction? Remember, being able to identify the genre better helps you prepare your brain for what you're going to read. Number 2, make a prediction about the characters, setting, and plot. I want you to write this prediction down. Now that we know that the different genres in fiction have different story elements, I want you to use that knowledge as you make your prediction. And finally today, check your predictions. Good readers always go back and look at the guesses they made to see if they were right or not. Because remember, reading is thinking, and we use everything we know as we dive into a great book. Happy reading!